Before I begin, I want to ask you for something. If you're listening to this story, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support means everything to me. It allows me to share stories like this, stories of life, loss, and family. Thank you for doing that. My name is Michael Carter. I am 48 years old. I was born and raised in a small town in America, in a house that my grandfather built decades ago. A house of red bricks, with oak trees lining the driveway, fields stretching beyond the garden, and memories carved into every corner. That house wasn't just a home, it was the heart of our family. It held laughter, arguments, quiet afternoons, and the smell of my mother's cooking on Sundays. I lost my father, Richard Carter, when he was 76. He wasn't just a man to me, he was a teacher, a guide, a protector. Even in his later years, he carried himself with a kind of quiet strength that commanded respect. His hands were worn and rough from years of honest labor. His face was lined with time, but his eyes were alive, bright with wit and a gentle humor. Losing him was like losing the center of gravity in my life. It was early morning when I got the phone call. My wife, Clara, stirred beside me as the shrill ring pierced the quiet of our home. I picked up. On the other end was Evelyn, my father's second wife. Her voice was steady, unnervingly calm when she said, "Michael, your father has passed away." For a moment I didn't comprehend. Passed away? What do you mean? I asked, my heart pounding. He passed in his sleep. Peacefully, she replied. No crying, no tremble, no hint of despair, just words, flat and mechanical. I felt a chill pass through me. My father, the man who had been my hero, was gone, and I wasn't prepared for the reality of it. I told Evelyn I'd be there immediately. The drive to his home was long, though it normally took 40 minutes. My mind wandered through memories, learning to ride a bike, falling off countless times, and Dad always there to pick me up, brushing me off and laughing, "You'll get it eventually, Michael." Summers spent in the garden, him showing me how to plant, prune, and harvest. Every corner of that house held a memory. When I arrived, the red brick house looked the same, but it felt hollow. The oak tree still cast its long shadow over the driveway. The porch creaked as I stepped in, and I realized the silence inside was heavier than any grief I had felt. My father lay in his bedroom, covered neatly to his chest. His face was calm, peaceful, almost like he had been asleep forever. I touched his hand. Cold. Reality hit me with a force I couldn't resist. My father, my guide, my rock, was gone. Evelyn stood behind me. 55 years old, yet she carried herself like a queen who had claimed a kingdom. Her hair was perfectly styled, lips painted with care and arms crossed. She didn't cry. She didn't reach for me. She simply observed, composed, calculating. I told myself that people grieve differently. But I knew Evelyn. I knew her calmness wasn't grief. It was control. After my mother, Margaret, passed away when I was in my 20s, Evelyn entered my father's life. She was charming at first, attentive, careful. She cooked, she laughed, she entertained him. I wanted to believe she cared for him. But slowly I saw her subtle manipulations. She controlled his finances, intercepted my calls, decided who he met and how often he saw me. Over the years, she had isolated him, becoming the center of his life while I was pushed to the periphery. Still, I convinced myself my father was happy, or at least content. The funeral came 3 days later. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor a man remembered for honesty, hard work, and devotion to family. I stood at the podium, hands shaking, voice cracking as I spoke of his life, his sacrifices, his love. Many cried. Some nodded, some whispered, "He was a good man." Evelyn sat in the front row, tissue in hand, dabbing at her eyes only when she thought anyone would notice. I watched her closely. She wasn't grieving, she was performing. And as I looked down, I caught her eyeing Mr. Howard, my father's lawyer. Something twisted inside me. A week later, I got a call from Mr. Howard. "Michael, we need to go over your father's estate." His voice was polite but cautious, almost apologetic. I thought it would be a formality. My father had always promised me that the land and the house would remain in our family. It was tradition. When I arrived, Evelyn was already there. She sat with her legs crossed, the picture of calm confidence, lips curved in a faint, victorious smile. Mr. Howard cleared his throat, shifting papers nervously. "Michael, your father revised his will 2 years ago. According to the documents, all assets, including the family home, farmland, business shares, and savings, are transferred entirely to Evelyn Carter." I froze. The words hit like a punch. "That can't be," I said, voice rising, trembling with disbelief. "My father would never do that. He promised me, the house, the land, everything. He wanted the legacy to remain in the family." Evelyn leaned back, her tone calm, almost mocking. People change, Michael. Your father trusted me. He knew I would take care of everything. I clenched my fist. I understood now. She had manipulated him, poisoned his mind, isolated him. And now she had all she needed. Outside, I confronted her. You turned him against me. You lied to him, made him doubt me. She smirked, cold eyes meeting mine. Don't fool yourself. He chose me because I was there, because I cared for him when you were absent. You showed up once a week with flowers. That's not enough. Her words stung, but they ignited something inside me. I went home that night, sat alone in the living room, surrounded by old photographs. My father holding me as a child, my mother smiling proudly in the garden, my grandparents working the land. Generations of Carters had built this legacy. And now, it was slipping away to a woman who had only been part of our family for less than 2 decades. Grief turned into rage. Evelyn thought she had won. She thought I would accept defeat, watch her sell the land, empty the accounts, erase our history. She underestimated me. I thought back to my childhood, to lessons Dad had taught me: resilience, honor, the courage to fight for what is right. I remembered his pride in our family name. And I realized that giving up was not an option. That night I made a vow. I will reclaim what is mine. I will restore the Carter legacy. And Evelyn will pay for every deceitful move she made. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but inside, a plan began to form. I began reading old letters, financial records, anything that could shed light on Dad's intentions, any document that Evelyn might have hidden. I started speaking to longtime family friends, neighbors, even employees of the family business. Pieces of a puzzle began to emerge. Small things that pointed to manipulation, to coercion, to the exploitation of a weak, aging man. Each discovery made my resolve stronger. I wasn't just fighting for property or money. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the integrity of our family, for justice that was long overdue. Even as Evelyn paraded around as the rightful heir, smiling at the world, I knew cracks were beginning to show. People whispered behind her back. Old friends and employees noticed inconsistencies, subtle lies and omissions. And I would use every one of those cracks to my advantage. After the days of mourning passed, life at my father's house felt strange. Evelyn walked through the rooms with a queen's confidence, her heels clicking on the wooden floors, as if she owned not just the house but every memory within it. I could no longer go there freely, she had taken over completely. Yet I refused to step aside. I began my journey quietly, observing, remembering every small detail my father had shared with me over the years. He had often spoken about fairness, honesty, and the importance of leaving things to family. I knew Evelyn's claim was not just wrong, it was built on manipulation. I needed proof, undeniable proof, and a strategy that would turn the tide. My first step was to review the old documents my father had left behind. I spent hours in the study, sifting through ledgers, letters, and tax papers. There were clues hidden in plain sight. A note from my father to his business partner hinted at intentions he had never formalized in writing. There were letters between my father and some trusted family friends that mentioned my inheritance and his plans for me to take over parts of the business. As I read these, I felt a bittersweet mix of grief and determination. My father had trusted me to carry forward the Carter legacy, and now I had to honor that trust. I knew Evelyn had tried to erase these traces, but she wasn't perfect. Every lie leaves a small mark, and I intended to find them all. I reached out to family friends, people who had known Dad for decades. At first they were hesitant. Evelyn had already positioned herself as the grieving widow, and no one wanted to be caught in conflict. But slowly my persistence paid off. They began sharing stories that Evelyn had tried to bury. I learned that she had influenced my father's decisions in subtle ways, persuading him to move funds into accounts she controlled, advising him to revise his will quietly, and isolating him from me under the pretense of protecting him. Every revelation added fuel to my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for property, I was fighting for the memory of a man who had built a life with integrity, a man whose wishes were being twisted. The next step was the legal path. I hired a lawyer, a stern but fair woman named Clara Stevens. A coincidence that my wife and I shared the same first name, which I often found amusing in tense moments. Clara Stevens specialized in estate disputes and had a reputation for uncovering hidden fraud and manipulation. When I met her, I laid out everything: the will, Evelyn's behavior, the letters, the witnesses I had found. Clara listened carefully, nodding as I spoke. "Michael," she said finally, "we have a case. The will may be legally binding on the surface, but if we can show coercion, undue influence, or manipulation, there's a strong chance a court could reconsider. You have proof that Evelyn isolated your father and controlled his decisions. That's a start." Her words brought a sense of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. I felt like I had been given a second wind. The fight wasn't just for money, it was for justice, for truth, for the legacy of a man I loved deeply. Over the next few weeks, I meticulously gathered evidence. Bank records, phone logs, emails, letters, and testimonials from family friends. Each piece formed a puzzle that revealed Evelyn's pattern of manipulation. She was clever but not infallible. Every action she had taken left traces, and I made sure to capture them all. During this time, Evelyn tried to maintain her facade. She invited neighbors over, smiled at the camera when photographs were taken, and acted like the perfect widow. But cracks began to appear. People whispered behind her back, questioning why she had been so controlling, why she had refused to let Michael see his father alone. Even some employees of the family business, who had quietly observed her actions, began to speak up. I remember one afternoon sitting with Mr. Howard, my father's lawyer, reviewing old financial records. He hesitated before speaking. "Michael," he said, "you're uncovering things I didn't notice before. Evelyn may have acted in ways that could be considered coercive. It's subtle, but the pattern is there." I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. The fight ahead was still long, but I now had allies, witnesses, and proof. I could see the first glimmer of hope. Then came the first confrontation. We filed a legal petition to challenge the will, citing undue influence and manipulation. Evelyn was furious. She called me, her voice sharp and cold, warning me to drop the case. "Michael, you have no idea what you're doing. This could ruin everything your father built. Think carefully." I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm fighting for my father's wishes, for what is right." She laughed, a cruel, hollow laugh that made me shiver. "Right? You think you know what's right? You weren't there. You didn't care enough." I did. Her arrogance only strengthened my resolve. I knew she was scared beneath that confident exterior. She had never expected me to fight back with such determination, to uncover every deceit. Court dates were set, witnesses called, and the process dragged on. Every session was tense. Evelyn's lawyers tried to portray her as the devoted wife, while I presented evidence of manipulation, isolation, and coercion. Each document, each testimony, chipped away at her carefully constructed image. One evening, after a particularly long day in court, I sat alone in the study, flipping through old photographs. My father's smile seemed to look right at me, urging me to continue. Memories of him teaching me lessons, correcting my mistakes, and celebrating my small victories fueled my determination. I realized that this fight was bigger than money or property. It was about respect, honor, and preserving the memory of a man who had done so much for his family. Slowly the tide began to turn. Evelyn became defensive, her public persona cracking under scrutiny. The neighbors and family friends I had gathered as witnesses painted a picture of a woman who had gradually taken control of a vulnerable man's life, steering his decisions to her benefit. Small inconsistencies in her statements, emails, and testimonies began to pile up. Then came a breakthrough. I found a series of letters my father had written but never sent, detailing his true wishes regarding the family estate. He had expressed regret over revising the will, describing how he felt pressured and isolated. These letters were a treasure trove, a testament to his love for me and the family he had built. They were emotional, heartfelt, and irrefutable proof of Evelyn's manipulation. With Clara Stevens guiding the legal strategy, we presented the letters in court. Evelyn's composure faltered as the judge read passages aloud. Her carefully maintained mask began to slip. I could see her eyes darting around, searching for support, but there was none. She had underestimated the strength of truth, the power of a son who refused to let injustice prevail. Outside the courtroom, I felt a surge of relief and hope. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since my father's death, I felt like the legacy he had entrusted to me was within reach. People began to look at Evelyn differently, noticing the cracks in her story, the way she had manipulated and isolated my father. Even in moments of doubt, I reminded myself of the lessons my father had taught me. Integrity, courage, and resilience. These were the values that guided me, that gave me the strength to persevere. Every setback became a stepping stone, every small victory a sign that justice was possible. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I remained vigilant. Evelyn attempted minor schemes, but each was countered with evidence, testimony, and legal strategy. The story of my fight for justice spread quietly through the town. People admired my perseverance and some offered help, whether moral support or additional evidence. And through it all, I never lost sight of my father. His memory, his voice, and his lessons were my compass. I knew that this battle wasn't just for me, it was for him, for the generations of Carters who had built this legacy with love, sweat, and sacrifice. As we approached the final stages of the legal battle, I felt a sense of calm determination. I had done everything possible to honor my father's wishes. The evidence was strong, the witnesses credible, and the letters undeniable. Evelyn's days of control were numbered. I took a deep breath, looking out at the familiar oak tree in my father's yard. Its branches had stood through storms, seasons, and years, just like the Carter family. And just as it had endured, so would I. The fight was far from over, but I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The Carter legacy would survive, not because of wealth or property, but because of the truth, courage, and love that had always defined our family. So, if you've been listening to this story, remember one thing. Never give up on what is right, never let manipulation and greed destroy what you hold dear. Stand firm, be patient, and trust that truth has power beyond imagination. And before I continue with this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, so you won't miss the other story. The weeks following the court's decision were tense. Evelyn had become a shadow of the confident woman she once portrayed. Her carefully maintained public image began to crumble as witnesses, friends, and employees came forward to share what they had observed over the years. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to isolate my father came to light. I remember walking through the familiar rooms of my father's house, noticing small details that brought back memories of my childhood. The study where Dad had taught me to balance books and finances, the kitchen where he had shown me how to cook simple meals, the garden where he had spent countless hours teaching me patience. These places were alive with memory, and now they were part of the evidence I presented to show how much Evelyn had interfered in our family life. During one particularly long court session, Evelyn's attorney tried to argue that my father had acted of his own free will when revising his will. But Clara Stevens, my lawyer, was prepared. She presented the letters my father had written but never sent, in which he clearly stated his intentions to leave the estate to me. His words described his feelings of pressure and isolation, and they revealed how Evelyn had manipulated his decisions. As the judge read the letters aloud, I saw Evelyn's confident demeanor falter. Her hands, once steady and composed, trembled slightly. She shifted in her seat, eyes darting around the courtroom, searching for support that wasn't there. The mask she had worn for so long was cracking, and it was clear to everyone present that she had misrepresented herself as the devoted wife she claimed to be. The final days of the trial were intense. Each witness brought a new piece of information, each document presented chipped away at her story. I listened quietly, letting the evidence speak for itself, though my heart pounded with every revelation. Every time a neighbor or family friend recounted how Evelyn had subtly isolated my father or influenced his decisions, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger for what had been done to my father, relief that the truth was finally emerging. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I sat alone in my father's study, surrounded by photographs and letters. I traced my fingers over the edges of an old family photograph, where my father held me as a small boy on his shoulders, my mother smiling beside us. Generations of Carters had worked hard to build a legacy of honesty, integrity, and love. That legacy had been threatened, but it was not lost. I felt a deep sense of responsibility and determination. I would restore it no matter what it took. The judge, after reviewing all the evidence and hearing countless testimonies, finally delivered the verdict. The will was declared invalid due to undue influence. The estate was to be transferred to me, Michael Carter, in accordance with my father's true intentions. I remember the moment I heard the decision. A wave of relief, gratitude, and vindication washed over me. Years of manipulation and deceit had been overcome by truth and perseverance. Evelyn's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and fury. She stared at the judge, then at me, her lips pressed tightly together. I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. Her control, her carefully constructed web of lies, had been dismantled. For the first time she was powerless. As the legal proceedings concluded, I took a deep breath and walked through my father's house. Each room held memories, some joyful, some painful, but all part of the life he had built. I knew the work was not over. Restoring the legacy meant more than reclaiming property or money. It meant honoring my father's vision, maintaining the integrity of the family business, and ensuring that the values he held dear would continue to guide us. I reached the study where my father had spent countless hours working and teaching. I opened a drawer and found more of his letters, journals, and notes. Each page was filled with wisdom, guidance, and the essence of who he was. I read through them carefully, realizing that these words were more valuable than any material inheritance. They were the blueprint for how I would continue his work, how I would live my life, and how I would honor him every day. In the weeks that followed, I began implementing changes. I restored the family business to its former stability, ensuring that employees who had been loyal to my father were treated fairly and that ethical practices were upheld. I visited neighbors and family friends, reconnecting with those who had supported my father and sharing the news of the court's decision. Their encouragement strengthened me, reminding me that perseverance and integrity are always recognized in the end. Evelyn, meanwhile, withdrew from public life. The confidence and control she had once wielded were gone. She attempted to challenge minor aspects of the court's decision but found that every move was met with legal precision and evidence she could not dispute. Her reputation suffered, and people began to see her true nature. I did not revel in her downfall, but I recognized that justice had been served. Through all of this, Clara Stevens remained a steadfast ally. Her expertise and dedication had been crucial in unraveling the complex web Evelyn had woven. We worked together to ensure that the transition of the estate and business was smooth, and that my father's true intentions were respected in every detail. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, I paused beneath the oak tree that had shaded our family for generations. I thought of my father, his strength, his wisdom, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. I whispered a quiet promise to him, that I would continue his legacy, protect the values he held dear, and ensure that the Carter family name remained honorable and respected. The restoration of the estate also brought personal closure. I reconnected with family members who had been distanced by Evelyn's influence. We shared memories, told stories, and laughed about moments long past. It was a healing process, one that reminded me of the importance of family bonds and the enduring power of love and loyalty. As the months passed, the house regained its warmth. The rooms were filled not just with memories but with renewed life. I hosted gatherings for friends and neighbors, celebrated milestones, and honored my father's memory in ways that reflected his values. The legacy he had built was no longer threatened. It was alive and thriving, a testament to perseverance, truth, and justice. Through this journey, I learned valuable lessons about resilience, the importance of integrity, and the strength required to stand up against manipulation and deceit. Evelyn had tried to take everything, but in the end, the truth prevailed. My father's wishes were honored, and the Carter legacy was restored to its rightful place. Even as I moved forward, I never forgot the pain and challenges I faced. Each obstacle, each betrayal, had shaped me, making me stronger and more determined to protect what was important. I often reflected on my father's guidance, remembering the lessons he had taught me about honesty, hard work, and the courage to fight for what is right. These lessons became the foundation for how I lived my life and how I led the family business. In quiet moments, I would walk through the house alone, thinking of the past and envisioning the future. The photographs on the walls, the letters in the drawers, the garden where my father had taught me patience. They all served as reminders of the journey we had endured and the triumph of truth over deceit. The story of reclaiming the estate and exposing Evelyn's manipulation spread quietly among our community. People admired the persistence and dedication it took to challenge injustice, and I realized that the lessons learned from this experience were not only valuable for me but could serve as guidance for others facing similar challenges. Through it all, I remained grounded, remembering that the true inheritance from my father was not just property or wealth, but the principles he lived by: honesty, integrity, courage, and love for family. These were the values that would guide me for the rest of my life. As I looked out over the fields that had been in our family for generations, I felt a profound sense of peace. The wind rustled through the oak trees, carrying memories of laughter, lessons, and moments that had defined my life. I knew that my father's spirit was with me, guiding me, watching over the family he had worked so hard to protect. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but justice had been served. Evelyn's manipulation had been exposed, and the Carter legacy was secure. I had honored my father's wishes, preserved the integrity of our family, and reclaimed the life that had been threatened. And as I sat in the study one evening, surrounded by letters and photographs, I reflected on the journey. The pain of loss, the struggle against deceit, and the perseverance to uphold truth, all of it had brought me to this moment of resolution and fulfillment. I realized that the fight for justice is never easy, but it is always worth it. The lessons of integrity, courage, and family values are timeless, and they guide us through even the most challenging times. I had fought for my father, for my family, and for the truth, and in the end we prevailed. Every day, I honor my father's memory through my actions, my decisions, and the way I lead the family business. I ensure that honesty and fairness remain at the core of everything we do. I teach my children the same values, sharing stories of my father's life, his lessons, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Through this experience, I have come to understand the true meaning of legacy. It is not just the material wealth or the properties one leaves behind. True legacy lies in the values, lessons, and love we impart to those who come after us. And in that sense, my father's legacy lives on, not just through me but through every act of integrity, every choice guided by honesty, and every effort to preserve the family he cherished. The house is alive once more, filled with warmth, laughter, and memories of the past. The business thrives, guided by the principles my father instilled. And I, Michael Carter, continue to walk the path he laid out, honoring his memory every step of the way. This story, though painful, is also a story of triumph. It is a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of truth, and the enduring strength of family. Through the challenges and betrayals, we emerge stronger, wiser, and more determined to uphold the values that define us.